What time is it? It's about 4:30. Welcome back to another one of my recommendation videos. I want to make sure I give you guys quality tool recommendations, so I took some time to think about the second video to make sure what I offered up, especially to the beginners and the amateur folks who are interested in getting into the hobby or who have gotten into it but need a little bit more encouragement, maybe to figure out what they can do with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Either way, I'm going to give you 5 more tools that I highly recommend for diorama, miniature, and display work, as well as one really powerful honorable mention. So the honorable mention is squares. And I don't mean squares, I mean these kind of squares. But that's a triangle, Oilers Workshop. Correct you are. The literal shape is a triangle, but it is meant to help you make things square, whether it is a triangle, an L, or a T. Believe it or not, they are all considered squares because they help you achieve perpendicularity and parallelinity, which I'm not sure if the second one is a word. Let me know in the comments below. Basically, if you need things to be straight, if you need things to be level, if you need things to be square, these are your tools. I think they're underrated as far as recommendations go, and over the years, I've found many different versions of squares, and I use them all. And these guys are commonly found in construction trades to help you make plumb, level, and square cuts.
I think it's a tool that everyone should have.
I use them all the time for cutting down large pieces of foam and materials and making sure I have good angled cuts. If you're doing straight edges and things aren't square, especially in a smaller scale, it might be much more easily noticeable. I've used these little L squares many times on tiny projects to make sure that I have consistent measurements across a distance by gliding them down things like this miniature resin river dining room table that I made, and these are for sale in my store link below. I also use them to make sure that the table bases are nice and square to the table tops, because even in miniature, Bob Vila would have a fit if he knew I wasn't hip to be square.
Well, I believe this round goes to Mr. Vila.
The big mama of them all, the T-Square by Westcott. This thing is one of the biggest workhorses in my shop. It's actually quite dirty, covered in paint, but it has served me well for many years and many years to come. It slices, dices, and even makes julienne fries, and it is one of the best tools, especially for doing things over long spans. You can get these longer than this, although I haven't needed one yet. I have longer metal rulers I use. Go check out my previous 5 diorama tools video if you'd like to see what those are and how I use those. Number 5 for my recommendations in this specific list is tweezers. If you're new to this, you may not be aware there are a ton of different types of tweezers. I had to discover them slowly over time because I didn't know where to go for tweezer resources. There is small ones, big ones, locking tweezers, fine tip tweezers, angle tip tweezers, flat nose tweezers, and even ultra fine tweezers used for doing makeup work that are perfect for hyper close-up detail in miniature work. I highly recommend getting yourself a pair of these. Head on down to Sephora and grab yourself some. While you're there, pick up some makeup sponges. Those are great for adding really thin layers of texture, which we'll talk about later. Numero 4 on this list is compasses. What do I mean by compass? I'm not talking about finding your way across the high seas in the Black Pearl. I'm talking about when you have the sudden urge to draw yourself a Venn diagram type of compass. Whether that's on hard material or soft material, having a couple different types of compasses is extremely helpful, whether it's just to scratch something into foam so that you have a reference of where to draw, where to paint, or if you need to cut yourself out a roof for your miniature water tower rooftop. Compasses are endlessly useful. I can't believe how often I actually find ways to use them that I never thought that I would use them. Number 3 on this list is clamps. A lot of times when you hear clamps, you might think of only the large woodworking and metalworking clamps, of which I have plenty of those, but I also have a lot of tinier clamps that I use all the time to hold things together. They're absolutely invaluable. I use them on literally every single project that I think I've ever made in dioramas since I've had clamps. I always need clamps for something.
The clamps! Right?
In the clamps section, I'm going to throw in a couple of things that have clamping action, like binder clips. I kind of discovered these on my own, just like sewing needle pins from my last tool recommendations video. I had a light bulb moment and realized these would be extremely helpful, especially when folding miniature paper goods and gluing thin objects to thin objects. I use these all the time to hold things together while they're drying so that I can keep working and I don't have to wait for glue to dry. They are an excellent 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 1000th pair of hands. I generally keep some clipped to the side of my apron too while I'm working, just in case I can't figure out where I put my box or my bag of clamps. So they're very handy to just have in a pocket or clip to your apron. Another type of clamp that I find myself using more and more as I work with dioramas and miniatures is rubber bands. Have an array of rubber bands, especially when you have odd shapes that you can't necessarily clamp together or you're dealing with delicate materials. I've used these many times to hold odd shapes together, and the cool thing about rubber bands is their clamping power increases or decreases depending on how many rubber bands you choose to use or not to use. Clamps, the truly underrated miniature tool. Number 2 recommendation, it's actually getting used a lot more these days in the maker culture here on the internet. 1-2-3 blocks. 1-2-3 blocks are called 1-2-3 blocks because they're 1 inch on one side, 2 inches on the other side, and you guessed it, 3 inches on the other side. They are super excellent for weighing things down, holding things in place, using as a vise with a clamp around them, and they're actually threaded. They have threaded holes, so if you can think of a valuable use for something you're working on, to bolt them to a table, bolt them to each other, there is tons and tons of ways to use these things creatively. I use them all the time just so stuff doesn't blow away on my workshop, especially when I'm making tiny little things that can blow away or I sneeze and everything ends up flying all over the place. And the number 1 recommendation, of which I'm sure you already have some of these things, but I'm going to show you a few more, is texturing tools. Tools for texturing. Again, you don't have to go to the hobby store and buy a bunch of fancy tools if you don't want to for texturing. You can literally use anything you have lying around. When I first started texturing, I figured out how to use a wire brush I already had lying around that I used to scrape off barbecue grime. I realized it makes excellent texture for miniature bricks and cinder blocks. I use it every single time I make brick and cinder block in foam. I also use rocks. I just use rocks to make rock texture. I got a piece of obsidian that I use to create all kinds of interesting shapes and crevices and cracks. Sometimes just punching it in with a rock yourself makes it feel a little bit more natural and random. I also have this really cool rock that I actually snagged when I was in Egypt in the Valley of the Kings. This is a piece of white quartz I have used on tons and tons of dioramas to add very subtle rock texture to things like granite, like on this clock tower. And I even have this really cool high-grade rock that a actual hard rock miner gave to me. I've used it many times to add subtle but detailed textures to things like foam and clay. I use things like flathead screwdrivers, small hammers, quarters, my keys, anything I can find to add interesting texture. Explore the texture world. Whether it's clay or foam or sand you're gluing down, you can do all kinds of interesting things just messing with objects you have lying around. Give it a try. If these are all tools you already use or ideas you're already aware of, I hope you saw something in this video that you're going to try or inspired you to come up with something new. And if you did, please leave a comment below so that we can be inspired with you and we can try those things out. Please don't be shy. Hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, and stick around because I will show you how to use every single one of these tools. I have a whole plethora of live videos where I do art in real time with no edits, and I have a ton of that stuff in my members only section. If you're interested after watching the initial videos in my live playlist, come over to watch the full rest of the build. Some of those builds are over 30 hours long, and you can chill with me and watch me act like a dork, not just here, but over there too. You're awesome. I appreciate you. We'll see you later.